The cargo bay door groaned open like a wounded animal, and Sergeant First Class Tobias Fisk immediately regretted every decision that had led him to this moment. Not the enlistment, not the 12 tours through the bleeding edges of human expansion, not even the ill-advised purchase of a moisture farm on this dust-choked rock. No, it was the decision to come to Corinth Expanse Trading Post, affectionately nicknamed the Armpit, by anyone unfortunate enough to pass through, that felt particularly foolish today. The twin sons of Valurus Prime had baked the settlement into a permanent state of sun-bleached desperation. The air tasted of recycled failure and the particular spice of whatever the Grimaldi brothers were boiling in their questionable food stall, a scent that hit Tobias like a physical blow. He adjusted the weight of his supply pack, the familiar heft a ghost of the combat load he'd carried for over a decade. 3 years out of the Colonial Defense Force, and his body still remembered the rhythms of vigilance. His eyes, pale and etched with the fine lines of a man who'd squinted into too many alien suns, swept the prefab structures and salvaged ship hulls connected by walkways that seemed held together by optimism and poor welding. Neon signs flickered promises of engine parts, translation services, and authentic Earth cuisine that had never been within 1,000 light years of the homeworld. His errand was mundane: the water reclamation office on the far side of the settlement. 3 months of drought had turned his moisture farm from a modest livelihood into an exercise in stubbornness and creative profanity. The new atmospheric condensers he'd ordered were supposedly waiting for him. Supposedly. In the Corinth Expanse, that was the most dangerous word in any language. He was halfway across the main thoroughfare when the sound caught him. Not the usual din of bartering and machinery, but a sharper, uglier noise. A crowd had coalesced near a detention module, a converted shipping container with bars crudely welded over viewports. Crowds in places like the Armpit meant one of 3 things: a fight, a spectacle, or trouble. Usually, it was a generous helping of all 3. A part of him, the farmer part that just wanted to collect his condensers and go home, urged him to walk on. But the older part, the soldier who had seen what happened when good people looked away, turned his feet toward the gathering. He shouldered his way through a wall of onlookers, miners in dust-caked gear, traders with calculating eyes, a few lost souls just hungry for distraction. What he saw in the cage stole the breath from his lungs. She was magnificent, even in ruin. Easily 8 feet tall, her form was a study in powerful, graceful lines currently folded into a space meant for cargo. Her skin wasn't skin at all, but a tapestry of iridescent scales that caught the harsh light and fractured it into fleeting rainbows, like oil on water. Great membranous wings, the deep purple and burnt orange of a dying sun, were bound tight against her back with heavy, chafing cables. 2 elegant horns, the color of old ivory, swept back from her forehead, and her dark hair, woven into intricate braids adorned with turquoise and stone beads, spoke of a culture, a history, that predated human footsteps on this world. Her clothing was handmade, soft-looking leather with beaded patterns that told stories Tobias couldn't read. And she was bleeding, silver blood, he noted with a clinician's detachment left over from field triage, seeped from raw wounds on her shoulders and wrists where the bonds had bitten deep. Genuine Selvathi warrior, last of the mountain clans. You will not find another specimen like this in the entire sector. The auctioneer's voice was a grating sales pitch. It was Silas Grimaldi, his face like a poorly sculpted candle, ethics to match. He gestured expansively at the chained woman as potential buyers reached through the bars to test the strength of a wing membrane or examine the sharpness of her teeth. Wings intact, fully matured, and broken in just enough for manageable service. Starting bid is 40,000 credits. Do I hear 40? A cold, familiar weight settled in Tobias's chest. It was a feeling he knew well from the war, the icy realization that you were witnessing something fundamentally wrong, and the system around you was not only allowing it but profiting from it. He'd seen variations of this scene on a dozen worlds. Not the Selvathi. He'd only heard whispers of the reclusive, winged people who called the Korath Mountains home. But this reduction of a person to specimen, to livestock, this had been one of the many reasons he'd turned in his dog tags. Combat was one thing. This commerce in suffering was a poison that eroded something else entirely. The Selvathi woman's eyes moved across the crowd. They were a stunning, unsettling gold, flecked with copper. There was no fear in them. Not even defiance. Just a profound, weary assessment, the calm of someone who had already measured death and found it a preferable alternative to what was on offer. Her gaze swept over Tobias, paused, and held. In that golden stare, he didn't see a plea. He saw a question, a challenge. What are you? 50,000. A voice barked. 55, 60. And I want documentation of her bloodline. Tobias's hand found the credit chip in his pocket. It held his life's savings, the mustering out pay, the meager profits from the farm, every scrap he'd scrounged for a future that had felt increasingly abstract. He heard his own voice, flat and certain, cut through the din before his mind had fully consented to the action. 100,000 credits. Final offer. The crowd noise died, replaced by a startled silence. All heads turned. Silas Grimaldi's eyes widened, then narrowed into shrewd slits. 100,000, he repeated slowly, a greasy smile spreading. That's a generous offer, friend. You sure you know what you're buying? Tobias kept his eyes on the woman in the cage. Her expression hadn't changed, but the intensity of her focus on him had sharpened. I know exactly what I'm doing, he said, his voice carrying in the quiet. Process the transaction. The paperwork was a blur. The feel of the credit chip leaving his hand was a visceral, terrifying emptiness. 20 minutes later, Tobias was walking back through the armpit, the giant, winged woman moving silently behind him, the wrist chains still binding her. He could feel the weight of every stare, hear the hissed speculation. Fool, crank, pervert, let them talk. The deed was done. He'd spent everything on an impulse born of a memory, the memory of himself, standing on a different world, in a different uniform, looking away. This time, he had looked. And he had acted. You are either very wealthy or profoundly stupid, a voice said behind him. It was lower than he expected, resonant, with a musical cadence that made the insult sound almost thoughtful. Neither, Tobias said without turning, leading them toward his battered transport. I'm a farmer. A farmer. She tested the word. Farmers do not spend fortunes on strangers. This one does, apparently. He reached the transport, an aging, six-wheeled hauler patched with mismatched plating. He turned finally to face her. Even hunched slightly, she towered over him. The bound wings, the dried silver blood on her scales, the proud, bruised set of her jaw. It was a portrait of contained violence and profound weariness. My name is Tobias Fisk. I have a moisture farm about 40 kilometers east of here. It's not much, but it's secure. You're welcome to stay there until your wounds are healed and you can go wherever you need to go. Those golden eyes bored into him. And what do you want in return? Nothing. Everyone wants something. Tobias shrugged, a tired gesture. Then I guess I'm about to disappoint you. Now, hold still. He reached for the lock on her wrist manacles. She moved. It was a blur of scale and muscle. One moment she was standing still. The next, her hand, the fingers ending in short, dark claws, was wrapped around his wrist. Not squeezing, just holding, with a strength that was absolutely unambiguous. If you are lying to me, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated in his bones, I will tear out your throat. I will not be caged again. He didn't flinch. He'd faced down charging Xeno thralls and corrupt cuz. This was different, more personal, but the principle was the same. You never showed fear to a cornered predator. Fair enough, he said, his voice level. Can I unlock the chains now? My key arms going numb. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at the lack of fear. Slowly, she released him. He inserted the key Grimaldi had given him, and the manacles fell open with a heavy clank. She brought her hands in front of her, rubbing the raw, scaled flesh where the metal had bitten. Thank you, she said, the words sounding foreign in her mouth. Don't mention it, ever. He gestured to the transport's open passenger bay. It's a long ride. Make yourself as comfortable as you can. The journey took the better part of the day. The transport whined and protested over every rut in the cracked desert track. Tobias drove in silence, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and a strange, grim certainty. He'd just torched his future. For what? A noble gesture that would likely end with him dead in a ditch. In the rearview monitor, he watched his passenger. She sat perfectly still, her bound wings pressed against the bulkhead, her head turning slowly to take in the passing expanse of rust-colored rock and endless sky. She was a creature of those mountains on the horizon, he realized. Of open air and high, lonely places. This metal box and the flat, barren plain must have felt like another kind of cage. The farm appeared as the first sun began to bleed into the horizon, painting the dust in shades of ochre and rose. It wasn't much. A central habitat dome, a cluster of atmospheric condensers humming quietly, storage tanks, a small greenhouse bubble, and a paddock for the two-headed riding lizard he'd impulsively named Sergeant Major. "This is it," Tobias said, killing the engine. "Home. Sweet home." The Selvathy woman, she still hadn't offered a name, surveyed the setup. Her expression was unreadable, but he sensed a profound disappointment. "You live here alone. Sergeant Major keeps me company. He's the lizard. He bites." She turned that golden gaze on him. "Why do you not have a mate? A family?" The question, so blunt, struck a nerve he kept heavily guarded. Busying himself with unloading the few supplies he'd managed to buy before the auction. Short version. "I went to war. The person I thought was waiting for me decided not to wait. Can't blame her, really. I wasn't the same man who left." He hoisted a crate. "Guest rooms in the east section. Fresher is down the hall. Food in the cooler. Help yourself. I'll be outside checking the condensers." He was halfway to the condenser array when he heard the soft crunch of gravel behind him. She had followed. "Selvathy do not accept charity," she stated. "It's not charity. It's hospitality. Different thing. I do not know this word. Hospitality." Tobias paused, setting the crate down. In the fading light, her scales seemed to absorb the dusk, glowing faintly. "It means offering food, shelter, and safety to someone who needs it, without expectation of payment. Taught me." She said, "A house that doesn't welcome strangers isn't a home, it's just a storage unit for people." The woman was silent for a long moment, the desert wind tugging at the loose strands of her braided hair. "My people have a similar teaching. That the wind brings souls to your hearth for a reason." She looked at him directly. "My name is Kythra, of the Stonewing clan." "Tobias Fisk," he said again, giving a slight, awkward nod. "You're welcome here, Kythra of the Stonewing clan. For as long as you need. You are a strange human, Tobias Fisk. I've been told." The first week was a tense, silent ballet of coexistence. Kythra was a shadow in his home. She slept during the searing heat of the day, a deep, motionless sleep that seemed more like a shutdown, and was awake all night. Tobias would wake to find evidence of her presence. A cleaned plate, a weapon's edge sharpened to a mirror finish on his grinding stone, the perimeter of the farm walked so frequently he could see the path in the dust. She ate with a focused, efficient hunger. She found his small collection of music, mostly old Terran folk and classical, initially painful to her sensitive ears, then curiously fascinating, sitting for hours listening to the same pieces, her head tilted as if deciphering a code. And she had no concept of human personal space, often standing too close, her warmth and the faint, clean scent of ozone and stone that clung to her unsettling in its proximity. "You are injured." Her voice, directly behind him one morning, made him start. He was elbow deep in a condenser pump. A sharp edge had opened a shallow cut on his forearm. "It's nothing," he said. "Just a scratch. Show me." Before he could object, she had his arm in her hands. Her touch was not what he expected. Not cold and scaly, but warm, dry, and surprisingly gentle for hands that ended in claws. She examined the cut with intense focus, her brow furrowed. "This will become infected in this dust," she pronounced. Releasing him, she reached into a small, intricately beaded pouch at her belt and produced a clay jar. Inside was a salve that smelled of crushed pine needles, mountain sage, and something metallic. "Hold still." The salve stung, then cooled, then seemed to pull the heat and pain right out of the wound. She tore a clean strip from the hem of her own tunic, a gesture that struck him as one of profound, practical generosity, and bound his arm with deft movements. "That's incredible," Tobias admitted, flexing his fingers. The pain was gone. "What's in it?" "Plants that grow in the high clefts where my people lived," she said, her voice softening. "Before the corporations came." Tobias wiped his hands on a rag. "What happened?" Kythra didn't answer immediately. She moved to sit on an overturned water barrel, her wings shifting slightly to balance. In the morning light, he could see the fine network of scars that marred the beautiful membranes, old wounds that had healed but left their stories behind. "The Selvathi have lived in the Korath Mountains since before your species learned to sail your oceans," she began, her voice a low, melodic rhythm. We're guardians. Keepers of the high passes, the wind paths, the deep stone songs. We did not seek your kind when you came to Valorous Prime. We only asked that you leave the high places untouched." Her hands, resting on her knees, clenched slowly. "The Korath Mining Consortium wanted the lithium deposits beneath our nesting grounds. We would not give permission, so they found other ways. They poisoned the glacial runoffs. They seeded the skies with acid drones that burned the airy forests. They hired hunters with sonic weapons that shattered our bones from the inside." Her voice remained steady, but a fine tremor ran through the leading edge of her wings. "And they created a market. For specimens. For servants. For curiosities. I am the last free warrior of the Stonewing clan. There may be others. In camps, in factories, in the gilded cages of collectors. But free." She shook her head, the beads in her hair clicking softly. "I know of none." Tobias stood in the quiet, the hum of the condensers the only sound. He knew the consortium. Everyone in the expanse did. They were the law out here, a corporate state with its own security forces, its own judges, its own morality defined by profit margins. The Colonial Defense Force had turned a blind eye to their excesses for years, calling it stability. He had, on more than one occasion, been ordered to stand down while consortium, asset reclamation teams, did their work. "I served for 12 years, he said, the words feeling inadequate. "In the Defense Force. I followed orders that let things like that happen. I told myself I was just a soldier, that the bigger picture wasn't my responsibility." He met her eyes, forcing himself to hold that golden gaze. "I was wrong. And I'm sorry. For what was done to your people. I know it doesn't help. But I am." Kythra studied him for a long, silent minute. "You were the first human," she said finally, "to offer an apology that was not a prelude to a request. Thank you. You don't have to thank me. I know. That is why I do." A fragile bridge had been built in that exchange. In the weeks that followed, the distance between them slowly eroded. Kythra began to help, not out of obligation, but what seemed like a need to be useful. Her strength was staggering. She could lift condenser components that took Tobias and a hydraulic jack to move. More remarkably, she had an innate understanding of the wind and weather. She would adjust the baffles on the condensers based on feels he couldn't perceive, and the water yield began to creep upward. Her relationship with Sergeant Major was nothing short of miraculous. The ill-tempered lizard, who viewed Tobias as a necessary annoyance, treated Kythra with reptilian reverence. He would follow her around the paddock, both heads watching her with dopey affection, and had even, to Tobias's astonishment, allowed her to remove a thorn from his foot without attempting to remove her hand in the process. "I don't understand it," Tobias said one evening, watching the beast curl contentedly at Kythra's feet as she worked a whetstone along the edge of a harvesting scythe. "That thing has hated me since day one." "Animals see what is inside," Kythra said without looking up. "You see a tool, a possession. He sees a master. I see a fellow hunter, trapped in a world too small for him. He appreciates the recognition. He's never hunted a day in his life. In his heart, he remembers." She reached down and scratched between the two heads. The lizard emitted a sound like a rusty hinge of pure bliss. "Also, I give him the fatty marrow bones you throw away. He finds your vegetarian scraps insulting." Tobias let out a short, surprised laugh. The sound seemed foreign in his own ears. Kythra's head tilted. "You should do that more often." "Do what?" "Make that sound." Laughing. She said the word carefully, as if it were a fragile artifact. "Selvathi do not laugh as you do. We sing when we are happy, or when we grieve. But I have learned that for humans, laughing is like breathing. You sicken without it." "Yeah," Tobias said softly, leaning against the door frame. "Yeah, I guess we do." She was quiet, the rhythmic shush-shush of stone on metal filling the space. "Why did you truly do it, Tobias Fisk?" she asked, her voice low. "You spent everything. You risked the anger of powerful men. For a stranger. For a Selvathi. Why?" He had known this question would come. He owed her an answer equal to the trust she was slowly extending. He sat on a stool opposite her. "There was a moment," he began, his eyes fixed on a crack in the floor plating. "On Veritas 7, we were told it was a rebel stronghold. Intelligence said hostiles only, but when we breached the habitat block, there were families. Civilians. The intelligence was either wrong, or someone decided it didn't matter." He took a breath, the old memory sharp and acid bright. "We had orders to secure the lithium processing core. The collateral was deemed acceptable. I stood at a checkpoint. A woman, with a child, tried to get through to the medical wing. Her husband was there, wounded. I had my orders. I turned her away." He finally looked up, the ghosts of Veritas 7 in his eyes. "I heard later the medical wing was one of the first areas secured. They weren't treating rebels. They were treating minors. I followed my orders. I was a good soldier. And it broke something in me that didn't get fixed until I mustered out. When I saw you in that cage, it wasn't about you, not really. It was about that woman on Veritas 7. It was a chance, maybe my last one, to be the man who should have opened that gate. The only sound was Sergeant Major's contented snoring. Kythra had stopped sharpening. She set the scythe and stone aside with deliberate slowness. Then she rose and crossed the few feet between them. To his shock, she knelt, bringing her face level with his. The gesture felt ancient, formal. "My people," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "speak of Varathani. The turning point of a soul. The moment when its path, set by fate and choice, bends toward a new horizon. It is a sacred thing. Rare." She lifted a hand and placed it, palm flat, against his chest, over his heart. Her hand was warm, heavy. "You carry Varathani, Tobias Fisk. You carry the weight of your past, yes. But you also carry the strength to let it shape you into something else. That is a powerful burden." Tobias couldn't speak. He could only feel the pressure of her hand, the steady, slow beat of his own heart under her palm. Selvathi hearts beat faster, she murmured, her eyes distant, listening. "Two pulses, like a drum. Yours. It is a single, deep rhythm. Steady, like stone." She left her hand there for another moment, then withdrew, standing fluidly. "I will sleep now, but I wished you to know this. I no longer plan to leave when I am healed." He found his voice, rough with emotion. "You don't have to leave at all. I know," she said, pausing at the doorway to the east section. A ghost of something, not a smile, but a softening, touched her severe features. "That is why I wish to stay. Tomorrow, you will show me the schematics for the primary condenser array. I wish to understand it fully. I'd be happy to." "Good." She hesitated. "Sleep well, Tobias Fisk. Sleep well, Kythra of the Stonewing clan." 3 months to the day after Kythra's arrival, the Grimaldi brothers returned. Tobias was in the eastern field when he heard the low growl of heavy-duty grav skiffs. Not one, but 3. His blood went cold. He straightened up, shielding his eyes against the glare, and counted 12 figures disembarking with the practiced spread of a tactical team. At their center was Silas Grimaldi, his brother Magnus looming beside him like a cancerous growth. "Fisk," Silas's voice carried across the dry air, cheerful and venomous. "Come on out. Time to settle our accounts." Tobias walked toward them slowly, his hands open and visible. "Silas, Magnus, you're a long way from your sty. What do you want?" "What do I want?" Silas spat. "I want the property you stole. That Selvathi bitch wasn't yours to buy. The deal was for a laborer. What you took is a bloodline relic. The last daughter of a warrior queen. I've had offers, Fisk. Serious offers. 7 figures. And you paid a fraction. The deal's void. The deal was processed. The transaction is logged. She's not property, and she's not for sale." Tobias kept his voice calm, even as his mind raced. They were armed. He was not. See, that's where you're wrong, Magnus rumbled, stepping forward. Everything's for sale, especially out here. Now, you can hand her over. We give you back your credits as a courtesy, and we all walk away. Or we take her, and leave you as a cautionary stain on the sand. Your choice. Tobias felt the old, cold focus of combat descend. He assessed distances, cover, weapons. It was hopeless. But he'd be damned if he'd make it easy. No. Silas sighed, a theatrical sound of disappointment. Pity. He nodded to his lead enforcer. The man raised a pulse rifle. He never got to fire. A shadow detached from the roof of the habitat dome. It was silent and terrifyingly fast. Kythra hit the enforcer like a meteor, her bound wings snapping open at the last second to break her descent, then closing to become a battering ram. The rifle flew from his hands as he went down. What followed was not a fight, it was a statement. Tobias had never seen her unleash her full capabilities. She was a vortex of scaled fury. She used her wings not to fly, but as shields, as blinding distractions, as massive clubs. Her claws didn't just cut. They ripped, they disarmed, they shattered weapon stocks and armor plates. She moved with an economy of motion that was beautiful and horrifying. In less than a minute, 8 men were on the ground, incapacitated. The remaining 4 backed away, weapons wavering. Kythra's focus was absolute. She stalked toward Silas Grimaldi, who had gone pale and was fumbling for a sidearm. She knocked it from his hand with a contemptuous flick, then grabbed him by the front of his gaudy jacket, lifting him until his boots dangled. "This is the one," she said, her voice a low, vibrating growl that Tobias felt in his teeth. "Who put me in chains? Who let his men test the merchandise? Who sold my sister for less than he's asking for me now?" "Kythra," Tobias said, stepping closer, his voice steady. "Don't." Her golden eyes flicked to him, blazing with centuries of rage and loss. "He deserves dissolution. He deserves to have his name erased from the world." "He does," Tobias agreed, holding her gaze. "But if you kill him now, in cold blood, you become the monster they say you are. The savage that needs to be put down. Colonial security will have a reason to hunt you. The consortium will have a martyr. This won't be justice. It'll be revenge. And it'll cost you everything you've started to build here." "What have I built?" she snarled, but the fury was tinged with a desperate grief. "A home," Tobias said simply. "You've built a home. With me. Don't trade that for his worthless life. Let him go. Let him live with the knowledge that you had him completely at your mercy, and you chose to be more than he could ever understand." The tension in her arm was immense. Silas whimpered, a dark stain spreading on his fine trousers. The entire desert seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, infinitesimally, the fire in Kythra's eyes banked from an inferno to smoldering coals. The killing rage receded, leaving behind a profound, weary sorrow. She leaned close to Silas's face, her voice a whisper only he and Tobias could hear. "You will leave. You will tell your buyers the merchandise is gone. You will never speak of me, or this place, again. If you do, I will find you. And I will not be merciful. Do you understand? All Silas could do was gurgle a terrified affirmative. She dropped him. He crumpled to the dust, then scrambled backward crab-like before stumbling to his feet and fleeing to a skiff, his brother and the remaining enforcers helping the wounded, all eager to be gone. The silence they left behind was deafening. Tobias walked over to Kythra. She was trembling, not with fear, but with the effort of containing a universe of pain. "Thank you," he said softly. "Do not," she choked out, wrapping her arms around herself, her wings folding tight. "Do not thank me for weakness. That wasn't weakness." He stopped a few feet from her, not touching, just being present. "That was the hardest strength I've ever seen. To have all that power, all that right, and choose to stay your hand. That's what makes you a queen, Kythra. Not your bloodline." She turned to look at him, her expression raw and open. Then, with a sound that was half sob, half sigh, she stepped forward and enveloped him in her wings and arms. It was awkward. He was too short. Her wings were in the way. But it was also the most real, solid, and necessary thing Tobias had felt in years. She was warm, and she shook against him, and he held on, his face pressed against the smooth, cool scales of her shoulder. "Selvathi, do not hug," she mumbled into his hair after a long moment. "I know," he said, his voice muffled. "It's okay. We can make up our own traditions." The dust storm hit 2 weeks later, a rolling, ochre wall that blotted out the suns and screamed against the habitat dome with the voice of a mad god. They had sealed everything, but fine grit still found its way in, coating every surface in a gritty film. Kythra was a caged storm herself. Pacing the confines of the main room, her wings twitching with restless energy, she was a creature of open skies forced into a bunker. "How long?" she asked for the 3rd time in an hour. "A day, maybe 2, Tobias said, trying to sound reassuring. "The weather satellite's offline, but the barometric drop suggests it's a big one, but fast-moving." 2 days, she repeated with despair. "I've got cards. We could play poker. I do not know this game, but if it involves staying still, I despise it already." He laughed. "Fair. Okay. How about you teach me something instead? A Selvathi game, a story, something from the Stonewing clan." She stopped pacing, considering. The wind held a counterpoint. "I could teach you the Kethvaral. The seeing. What's that?" "It is how my people choose a mate." She settled on the floor, folding her long limbs with impossible grace. "It is not a dance of motion, but of stillness. Two who are interested stand before one another, and they simply look. They hold each other's gaze, without words, for one full turning of a time glass. In that looking, you see the other's soul, their history, their fears, their potential. If the connection is true, you both know by the end. If not, you part without shame, having honored each other with your truth." Tobias sat down opposite her, cross-legged. "That's intense. Commitment is not taken lightly. A pairing is for life. Possibly, if the spirits will it, for lives beyond. She looked down at her hands. I was promised once. A warrior of the Cloudbreaker clan. He was killed in the first bombardment of the high forests. After that, there was only war, and survival, and chains. She met his eyes again, a flicker of vulnerability there. I find myself curious about the Kythra. Would you be willing to try it? Just the looking to see. The storm raged outside, an apocalyptic soundtrack to the most vulnerable question he'd ever been asked. Tobias, a man who had built walls around his heart higher than any mountain, felt them crack. He nodded. Okay. They sat in the dim, storm-green light, 2 meters apart. He looked into her golden, copper-flecked eyes. At first, it was strange, alien. The shape, the color, the way the pupils reacted. But he kept looking, past the surface, past the species. He saw the fierce loyalty, the deep grief for a lost world and a lost sister, the stubborn will to survive, the flicker of hope that had somehow survived it all. He saw a leader, a survivor, a soul of immense depth and power. And he knew, with a certainty that terrified and exhilarated him, that she was seeing him too. Seeing the guilt, the weariness, the decency he tried to live up to, the dry humor that was his last defense, the loneliness that mirrored her own. They didn't move. The hour passed, marked only by the shriek of the wind and the beat of his own heart in his ears. When the time felt complete, Tobias let out a long, slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Kythra did the same. Well, he said, his voice hoarse. Yes, she replied. The connection, he began, appears to be true, she finished. She looked down, then back up, her expression solemn. The second part of the Kythra is the sharing of a wound. The deepest one, the one that shaped you. You show it to the other, not to be healed by them, but to be seen by them. To be known, fully. She drew a shaky breath. I would share mine with you. You don't have to. I know. I wish to. She told him then, not of the war, but of the capture. Of her younger sister, Alara, whose wings were the color of dawn. How Alara, gentle and scholarly, had refused to leave her side. How the consortium hunters, unable to subdue Kythra, had held a sonic cutter to Alara's primary wing joint. How Kythra had surrendered, believing they would both be taken. How they had separated them anyway, selling Alara to a different, unknown bidder while Kythra was shipped to the Grimaldi's showroom. My greatest shame, Kythra whispered, silver tears tracing paths through the dust on her scales, is not my surrender. It is that in the darkest watches of the night, I hope she is dead. Because the alternative, what she might be enduring, the cage she might be in, is a pain I cannot bear to imagine. And that hope feels like a betrayal of every oath I ever swore to protect her. Tobias didn't move to hold her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply sat, bearing witness to her agony, letting it exist in the space between them, honored by her trust. It was the most intimate moment of his life. When her tears subsided, he spoke, his own voice thick. My wound is the opposite. It's the faces of the people I didn't help. The ones I turned away because my orders said to. They haunt me, not as ghosts, but as echoes of the man I was. A man who could follow orders that broke the world. I'm afraid that man is still in here, and that one day, under enough pressure, he'll give the orders to himself again. She listened, her eyes holding his, seeing the shame, the fear, the endless self-doubt. She didn't offer absolution. She simply nodded, a slow, deep acknowledgement. I see you, Tobias Fisk. I see you, Kythra of the Stonewing clan. The storm broke at dawn. The silence was immense. They emerged from the dome into a world washed clean, the air sharp and new. They stood side by side, watching the twin suns rise over a landscape transformed, and something between them had been transformed as well. 6 months later, over a breakfast of rehydrated fruit and nut cakes, Kythra spoke. I wish to have a child with you. Tobias, mid-sip of bitter coffee, choked violently. I have conducted research, she continued, as if discussing crop rotation. Using your medical scanner and cross-referencing with xenobiological archives in your limited database. Our species are genetically compatible. The probability of viable offspring is approximately 68%. The phenotypic expression is unpredictable, but given your resilience and my adaptations, I believe they would be formidable. Kythra, Tobias sputtered, wiping coffee from his chin. Is this not the correct human protocol? She asked, a faint line of concern appearing between her brows. I studied human courtship rituals. They are confusing and inefficient. There is much talking and gift-giving with unclear intent. This seemed more direct. You are a good man. You are strong in ways that matter. You have verathony. I care for you. I wish to build a future that is more than survival. With you. The clinical tone faltered, revealing a nervousness that was utterly endearing. So, will you have intercourse with me? For the purpose of procreation and the formalization of our pair bond. Tobias stared at her, at the fierce, beautiful, alien woman who had asked him to look into her soul and had seen his in return. Who fought like a tempest and cried silver tears. Who was offering him a family, a future, a reason to believe in tomorrows. He began to laugh. It started as a disbelieving chuckle and grew into a full, deep-bellied roar of joy that echoed in the small kitchen. Sergeant Major, outside, bellowed in confused response. Kythra's face fell. I have erred. I knew the rituals were complex. No, he gasped, reaching across the table and taking her hands. Her claws were careful against his skin. No, you haven't erred. It's perfect. It's so perfectly you. He looked into her golden eyes, his own crinkling with a smile he felt down to his bones. Yes, Kythra of the Stonewing clan. I will have intercourse with you. I will have children with you. I will build a future with you. All of it. Her wings, which had been clamped tight with anxiety, unfurled with a sudden, joyful snap, knocking a utensil rack from the wall. Her face transformed, a radiant, unguarded expression of pure happiness that stole his breath away. Truly, truly, Then we should begin immediately. Optimal fertility windows are a consideration. How about we start with finishing breakfast? He said, still grinning. And maybe a hug. Our tradition. Your rituals are strange, she said, but she was already moving around the table, her wings wrapping around him as he stood, pulling him into a warmth that felt like coming home. The wedding was a simple affair beneath the open sky. Dr. Winifred Santos, who ran the nearest med clinic, served as witness in exchange for a year's water credit. Tobias wore his old dress uniform. Kythra wore new garments she had made, beads telling not just her own story, but the story of their meeting, of the farm, of a new clan being born. They exchanged vows in both languages, promising to be shelter and sky for one another. The news of the pregnancy arrived 2 cycles later. Tobias's joy was tempered by a primal, terrifying protectiveness. When Soraya was born 7 months after that, with a tuft of dark hair, curious golden eyes, and tiny, folded wings that fluttered weakly at her back, Tobias felt a love so vast and terrifying it eclipsed every battle, every fear, every regret of his past life. She was their dawn, their sunrise, their impossible, beautiful beginning. One evening, with the twin suns setting in a cascade of fire, Tobias sat on the porch of the Habitat Dome. Kythra stood nearby, Soraya cradled in her arms, the infant making soft, bubbling sounds at the sight of Sergeant Major's 2 swaying heads. The condensers hummed their steady, productive song. The desert, once a symbol of his exile, now felt like a cradle. Kythra came to sit beside him, passing him their daughter. He held Soraya carefully, her tiny wings brushing his arms. You are thinking of the past, Kythra observed softly. A little, he admitted. Mostly, I'm thinking, I bought a conscience for 100,000 credits. It turned out to be the best bargain I ever made. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of pure contentment. And I, she murmured, watching Soraya's eyes drift closed, was purchased from a cage. Only to find I had been purchased for a freedom I never dared imagine. Together, they watched the stars emerge, one by one, in the velvet sky. The war was over. The loneliness was gone. In the quiet of a desert night, under an alien sky, 2 souls, one human, one Selvathi, had built something fragile, and strong, and utterly real. A family, a home, a story not of conquest, but of choice, not of taking, but of welcoming, a story that began with a cage, and would be told for generations in the language of wings and weathered hands, a testament to the simple, radical act of seeing a person, and choosing, against all odds, to set them free.